The senator from Texas.
I ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be set aside.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I rise today to sound a note of warning about the nation of Iran. Consider the following facts. The Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, has accused America of lying. We learned that the Iranian regime has been actively arming and supporting the anti-American Houthi rebels in Yemen since 2009. The Iranian regime held a parade of military equipment that featured chants of death to America and death to Israel. The Iranian regime charged an unjustly detained American citizen, Washington Post reporter Jason Rezaian, with espionage and other crimes, including, quote, propaganda against the establishment. The defense minister of Iran declared that IAEA inspectors would be barred from all military sites, even those known to have nuclear facilities. The Iranian Navy threatened a cargo ship in the Straits of Hormuz sailing under the flag of the United States. The Iranian Navy seized another cargo ship in the Straits of Hormuz sailing under the flag of our ally, the Marshall Islands. The foreign minister of Iran accused the United States and our allies of being the biggest danger to the international community. Great Britain informed a UN sanctions panel that Iran has an active nuclear procurement network linked to 2 blacklisted firms. And the Iranian Navy harassed a U.S. warship and military planes off the coast of Yemen. Mr. President, these are not events from 1979 or 1983 or 1996. These are, in chronological order, the aggressive anti-American actions of the Islamic Republic of Iran in the last month. Every one of those occurred in the last month. And at least these are the ones we know of that have been covered in the media. This relentless drumbeat of hostility has gone on unabated for 36 years, and it makes the legislation before this body, the Iran Nuclear Agreement Review Act, all the more critical. The bill's supporters insist it is the only way to ensure that Congress has its due say over President Obama's proposed Iran deal. I agree that it is of paramount importance to give Congress its proper role in an international agreement of this magnitude, and to make clear that President Obama must persuade Congress and the American people to support his deal if he wants it to be binding, which is why I have been supportive of this process so far. But I'm here to tell you that as the legislation stands, this legislation is unlikely to stop a bad Iran deal. The problem is an all too familiar one here in Washington, D.C., which is that the Iran Nuclear Agreement Act contains a provision inserted at the insistence of Senate Democrats, which will allow Congress to appear to vote against the deal, while tacitly allowing it to go into effect. The bill allows Congress to adopt a, quote, resolution of disapproval of President Obama's Iran deal. On the surface, that sounds reasonable. From what we know publicly of the deal, I certainly disapprove of it strongly. But a resolution of disapproval under this legislation, even if it passed a 60-vote threshold with grand claims of bipartisanship, would not be the end of the matter. The president would certainly veto it. And once he did, it would require 67 votes in the Senate and 290 votes in the House to override that veto. No wonder the White House has lifted its objection to this legislation. All the president would have to do to force a bad Iran deal on America is hold 34 senators in the Democratic Party or 145 members of Congress. If he could do that, a bad deal that undermines the national security of this country, that endangers our friend and ally, the nation of Israel, would go into effect. And he could claim he was simply following the process that Congress required. That's not an oversight. That's not an accident. This bill, as drafted, will provide some political cover to Senate Democrats to say they have voted to provide strict scrutiny and congressional approval of an Iran deal. And yet, as currently drafted, it is a virtual certainty that no matter how terrible this deal is, it will go into effect, and this legislation is unlikely to stop it. Our first priority should be stopping a bad Iran deal that jeopardizes the lives of millions of Americans and millions of our allies. There is nothing more important this body can consider. Not trade, not the budget. There is nothing more important. The first responsibility of this body is to protect the national security of this country, to protect the lives and safety of men, women, and children across this country. And the president's Iran deal deeply jeopardizes the safety of Americans. From what we know publicly, and the details are still shrouded in considerable secrecy, but from what we know publicly, under this deal, Iran will be allowed to keep its enriched uranium. It will be allowed to keep its centrifuges and reactors. It will continue its ICBM program, the only purpose of which is to deliver a nuclear weapon to the United States of America. Tehran will receive even more economic relief, reportedly including a $50 billion signing bonus. Mr. President, who in their right mind would give a $50 billion signing bonus to Iran? It's worth noting that even under one of the strictest regimes of international sanctions, Iran was still able to marshal the resources to become one of the world's leading state sponsors of terrorism. We can only imagine what Iran will do with this new source of funding, which will certainly flow to Hamas, to Hezbollah, and to the Houthis, as well as to their proxies in Latin America. Mr. President, I would note, if this deal goes into effect and tens or hundreds of billions of dollars flow into Iran, including a $50 billion signing bonus, and that money is given directly to radical Islamic terrorists, the blood of the men and women and children who will be murdered by those terrorists will be directly on the hands of this administration. If we allow tens and hundreds of billions of dollars to flow into the hands of terrorists, it places complicity for that terrorism on this administration. There is no topic more serious this body could consider than preventing the murder of Americans. The Iranians' behavior speaks for itself. They are right now today unlawfully imprisoning multiple American citizens, Pastor Saeed Abedini and Amir Hekmati, as well as Jason Rezaian, under brutal conditions, and they're withholding information on the whereabouts of Robert Levinson. They have killed Americans across the globe, and they have plotted to kill us here at home. And they are explicitly threatening to wipe our ally, the nation of Israel, off the map. Indeed, in the midst of this negotiations, a senior Iranian general said the annihilation of Israel is, quote, non-negotiable. Given that, there's no way on earth we should be allowing billions of dollars to flow into a radical terrorist organization that has declared its object destroying Israel, which they call the little Satan, and ultimately destroying America, which they call us the great Satan. They are telling us they want to kill us. Not 10 years ago or 20 years ago. They're telling us this right now. If history teaches any principle with abundant clarity, it is that if somebody tells you they want to kill you, believe them. And they're not being subtle. These are the people the Obama administration are putting on a path to having nuclear weaponry, the most fearsome weaponry known to man. Make no mistake. That's what this deal would do unless Congress steps in to stop it. Not to have a show vote, not to pretend to disapprove, but to actually stop a bad deal that jeopardizes our safety. Mr. President, to see how this scenario is likely to play out, we don't have to speculate. We need to look no further than to the recent history of North Korea. In October 1994, the Clinton administration reached another agreed framework with North Korea over that nation's nuclear program. Then Secretary of State Madeleine Albright insisted she had gotten a deal that would freeze the military components of the program and through economic incentives and diplomatic outreach entice the Hermit Kingdom to join the international community and reject their pursuit of nuclear weapons. At first, all seemed to go well, as North Korea eagerly accepted the influx of hard currency, as well as the promised civilian nuclear reactors. Secretary Albright, accompanied by then Policy Coordinator for North Korea, Wendy Sherman, even visited North Korea in 2000 to celebrate the progress. Despite all of the diplomatic initiatives, despite all of the champagne toasts, the North Koreans were cheating, we now know. They were cheating on the framework from the get-go. When the George W. Bush administration figured out economic sanctions were reimposed, but they had no effect. Neither did yet more additional rounds of negotiations while they continued and continued and continued to enrich. Kim Jong-il had gotten the resources he needed because the Clinton administration relaxed sanctions and allowed billions of dollars to flow into his hands. And in 2006, North Korea tested its first nuclear weapon. 2 more tests have followed. In 2012, when Kim Jong-un came to power, then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton suggested that Kim Jong-un might be a transformative leader. And the State Department reportedly assured the president that he would be more concerned with economic improvements than with his inherited nuclear program. In less than 2 years, this too was proven wrong. Kim Jong-un has demonstrated no interest in reform. He has instead resolutely pursued his father's policy. Just last week, we learned from the Chinese that North Korea is well on its way to having some 40 nuclear weapons by 2016, as their ability to enrich uranium is significantly more sophisticated than had been believed. In addition, they are hard at work at their ICBM program and may soon be able not only to threaten our regional allies, but also to strike the west coast of the United States. And with so many weapons in their arsenal, it seems only logical that this rogue regime may in turn offer some of those weapons for sale to the highest bidder. All of this proves the fallacy of the Clinton administration's repeated basic assumption that the North Koreans would act in their best interest economically, for which, for Albright and Sherman, meant reaching a diplomatic agreement to achieve economic relief. Unfortunately, they were dead wrong. And the result is the United States faces an escalating strategic threat in the Pacific. We are now in grave danger of history repeating itself with Iran. Wendy Sherman, the very same person who negotiated the failed North Korea deal, the Obama administration brought her back from the Clinton administration to be our lead negotiator with Iran. Think about that. The person who led the failed North Korea talks, the talks that led to North Korea getting nuclear weapons, is President Obama's lead negotiator with Iran, and her negotiation will certainly lead to the same outcome. Indeed, when Secretary Clinton brought Wendy Sherman back, Wendy Sherman promptly followed the exact same playbook for the negotiations that she had followed under the Clinton administration with respect to North Korea. You know, Albert Einstein famously said the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. If we negotiate the same failed deal, we will get the same failed outcome. Iran has already enjoyed significant economic relief and legitimization on the international stage, while America's demands have dwindled from dismantling Iran's nuclear program to now merely curbing it around the edges temporarily and unverifiably. It may only be a matter of time before Secretary John Kerry, no doubt accompanied by Undersecretary Wendy Sherman, pays a courtesy call on Tehran to echo history and to show the world how, quote, civilized the whole arrangement is. And only a matter of time until the Iranians cheat, just like the North Koreans, their way to a bomb. And yet the grim reality is that as bad as the situation is with North Korea, with Iran it is qualitatively worse. The Kim dynasty are brutal, megalomaniacal dictators, but they do seem to be motivated, at least to some extent, by self-preservation. And so to some form, there is at least a possibility of rational deterrence. And therein lies the fundamental difference with Iran. The mullahs in Tehran are radical Islamist zealots for whom the eradication of the little Satan, Israel, and the great Satan, America, is a solemn religious duty. And with radical religious zealots, ordinary cost-benefit analysis doesn't apply the same way. With zealots who glorify death and suicide, deterrence doesn't work the way it works elsewhere. Death to America is not just a slogan. It is a religious promise. The risk that the Ayatollah will use the economic windfall of billions of dollars, courtesy of the US of A, to pursue nuclear weapons that he would either use himself or give to terrorist surrogates to use is intolerably high. The consequences of this deal, Mr. President, could very well be an Iranian nuclear weapon used in the skies of Tel Aviv or New York or Los Angeles. The consequence of this deal could very well be millions of Americans murdered. There is no more serious topic we could be addressing. Now, President Obama and his two secretaries of state have had their chance to negotiate with Iran, and they have squandered it on the same approach that was so spectacularly unsuccessful with North Korea. They changed very little. They just replayed the same failed plan. Once again, assuming that they can reason with a rogue regime, they are on the verge of sealing a deal that could result in the most significant threat to our nation in the 21st century. The administration's claims that Tehran will not use their economic windfall to pursue a nuclear program or support terrorism, and that if they do, quote, snapback sanctions will fix the problems, are hardly reassuring. Especially as we know from the example of North Korea that the opposite result is far more likely. Having gotten what they wanted, the mullahs will string out the economic benefits for as long as they want, and then, when they are ready, test a nuclear bomb. The Iranians know perfectly well what a very, very good deal this is for them, and they are doing what they can to prevent Congress from disrupting it. In March, I was proud to join with 46 of my colleagues in signing a letter written by Senator Tom Cotton of Arkansas that explained the constitutional role of the Senate in approving a treaty or of both houses of Congress passing legislation into law for any deal to be binding on the United States of America. Judging from their reaction, Tehran does not appreciate our free system of government. Foreign Minister Mohammad Zarif responded that, quote, "The authors of the letter may not fully understand that in international law, governments represent the entirety of their respective states, are responsible for the conduct of foreign affairs, are required to fulfill the obligations they undertake with other states, and may not invoke their internal law as justification for failure to perform their international obligations." Speaking last week to an audience at NYU, Mr. Zarif reiterated his opinion that as a matter of international law, President Obama would have to abide by the dictates of whatever deal is struck, and that Congress is powerless to stop it. He also said that he, quote, "does not deal with Congress." As a matter of United States law, Mr. Zarif is wrong. It is true in the nation of Iran, when you have a supreme leader, an Ayatollah, with the ability to string you up or shoot you if you disagree, the word of the supreme leader is binding. But we have no supreme leader in the United States of America. We are bound by a constitution and rule of law that keeps sovereignty in we, the people. And if Mr. Zarif wants sanctions agreement, the only way to make that binding is to deal with Congress pursuant to the Constitution of the United States. But if we pass the Iran Nuclear Agreement Review Act as it stands right now, he won't have to. It's time to tell the American people the truth. Enough games. This legislation is not a victory for Congress. This legislation, at best, will slow down slightly a terrible deal from being put into place. That's the very best outcome, is a slight delay in the president's putting into effect a terrible deal that jeopardizes American security. It's not a guarantee that President Obama will have to submit his deal and honor the will of Congress. In fact, it provides a backdoor path for a minority of Congress, 1/3 of Congress, to ensure that the deal goes into effect over the bipartisan will of the majority. And even worse, the president will be able to claim that he's satisfied the terms that Congress itself set. That is hardly the message we want to send on Iran's nuclear program. And this issue is far too important to pass a bad bill simply to send a message. By prioritizing bipartisan compromise over our national security, we are endangering the safety and lives of Americans across this country. Now, I will note there is a silver lining. In 20 months, Mr. Obama will no longer occupy the Oval Office. And in January 2017, when a new president enters the White House, he or she will have full authority to rescind any international agreement with Iran that has not been ratified by the Senate or passed into law by both houses of Congress. Mr. President, any man or woman who is fit to be Commander-in-Chief of the United States of America should be prepared to rescind a bad deal with Iran on day one. No president of the United States should jeopardize the lives of millions of Americans or millions of our allies. Now, Congress could act right now to stop a bad deal. We could come together and assert our constitutional role, and we can do so through a very simple mechanism. Right now, the current bill provides that if Congress doesn't override President Obama's veto, a terrible Iran deal goes into effect. I have joined with Senator Pat Toomey of Pennsylvania in filing an amendment that simply reverses that default, that simply says the president cannot lift sanctions on Iran unless the deal is affirmatively approved by Congress. That is the constitutional structure. Mr. President, that ought to be a provision supported not by 51 senators or even 60 senators or 67 senators. That ought to be a provision supported by all 100 senators. What a strange development in our modern polity that the Congress of the United States is content to effectively neuter itself. Mr. President, you and I are both members of the Republican Party. I feel quite confident that if a Republican president were in office, we would not be content to give up the constitutional authority and responsibility that is given to this body to ratify treaties or pass laws. And yet, I'm sorry to say, on the Democratic side of the aisle, our friends are perfectly content to forfeit their constitutional authority to the president. If this deal is a good deal on the substance, it most assuredly is not. But if it is, the president should be able to get congressional approval. And yet the reason that Senate Democrats are terrified of requiring congressional approval is they know full well you cannot defend a deal that allows Iran to keep tens of thousands of centrifuges, to keep enriched uranium, to keep developing their ICBM program, to keep remaining the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism, to keep working to annihilate the nation of Israel. That is not defensible on the merits. One simple change would turn this legislation into something meaningful. One simple change that would say the president's free to negotiate any deal he likes, but before it goes into effect, bring it to Congress and get the affirmative agreement of Congress. Don't have a fig leaf vote and let the president's bad deal go into effect that undermines our national security. Have a meaningful vote that requires the affirmative approval of Congress. I urge my colleagues to adopt the Cruz-Toomey amendment, which is a common sense fix that will give this bill real teeth by removing the resolution of disapproval, and instead would allow an Iran deal to go into effect only if Congress approves it. In the spirit of this legislation, it is purely procedural, so it is germane to this bill. And yet, Senate Democrats have blocked a vote on it. They have refused even to vote on this amendment. All this amendment does is ensure that the burden is on President Obama to persuade Congress and the American people that the deal is a good one, or at a very minimum, is not a terrible threat to the national security of the United States of America. This should be something we come together, not as Republicans, not as Democrats, but as senators who have a responsibility to protect our constituents, to protect the American people, and to defend the Constitution. We should come together with one voice and say we will not allow a bad Iran deal that ensures that Iran will acquire nuclear weapons that could be used to murder millions of Americans or millions of our allies. This should be unanimous. And so, Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that when the Senate resumes consideration of H.R. 1191, that I be allowed to offer my amendment, number 1152.
President.